Hello, and welcome to the mentorDINO podcast. I'm your host, Caitlin Rossier. I am an architect and founder of mentorDINO. Join me each week as I speak with amazing professionals in and around the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, as we are all part of a larger interconnected community. We discuss everything from career stories, lessons learned, and advice for others finding their own unique career path. Thank you to all of our current subscribers, and if you're new, welcome to the conversation. And if you like this episode, please do me a favor by hitting subscribe, like, or share it with a friend. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support them on their own unique career journey. On today's episode of the mentorDINO podcast, I would like to welcome Chastain, founder and business strategy consultant at Apostrophe Consulting in Raleigh, North Carolina. Thank you, Janine, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It was such an honor to get your invitation.
Yeah, and I know I've been following your story for a while and it's been an inspiration to myself in starting mentorDINO. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. But I want to start out for anybody who doesn't know who you are and what you do. If you don't mind introducing yourself and letting my listeners know a little bit about your experience and journey so far in your education and career.
Sure. So I'm a business strategist and a consultant. As you said, I'm an entrepreneur, and I primarily work with AEC firms. And I'm really interested in that because I come from architecture. I studied architecture in my undergraduate degree at UNC Charlotte. I worked in practice, and I have bridged that into the business side of things because I've always been curious about businesses and the way they operate and the way that they run. I ended up, when I was working in the Bay Area, getting an MBA, and ultimately that led me to launching Apostrophe Consulting full time. And so combined, when you bring all of those experiences together, I have about 15 years of experience wearing many hats, from starting off in nonprofit leadership to moving into architecture, some marketing and business development, and now consulting. But I think that these different experiences have given me a really broad understanding of the industry as a whole, which is how I've kind of figured out how to design my business to be unique in the market and offer something different. And through that business, I'm helping AEC leaders essentially navigate change and push the industry forward.
Yeah, and I know you've shifted a lot even within architecture firms themselves. If somebody's, comes out of architecture school and starts to hit that reality check of what it's like to be an architect, whether they get licensed or not. But you've pivoted into other roles within the firm. How did you lead yourself down that avenue to pivot within the firm and speak up for those roles?
That's a great question. I definitely have kind of a non-traditional path, and I've bounced around to a lot of firms. And there's really two drivers of that decision. Number one, when I was in school, I was extremely active with my student organization, the AIAS, which is really hard to say now, 15 years later. Anyway, it's similar to AIA, but it's organized for students. And so I was always super proactive the entire time going through school. I was volunteering, and I worked my way up into national leadership positions there. So when I graduated architecture school, I actually moved to Washington, D.C. and filled a nonprofit full-time role as the president of AIAS. So that was one snapshot. But also, when I finished that role a year later, I kind of entered that really daunting time when the Great Recession was at its worst. And pretty much anyone who graduated with an architecture degree at that point was struggling. They were trying to get jobs, firms weren't hiring. And so ultimately, all of that to say, that kicked me out to California. I moved to California to try and get away from the recession on the East Coast, and it caught up. So I was in a designer role. The recession hit California. They laid off the junior staff because that's easy. And that shifted me into taking on part-time roles at nonprofits like Architecture for Humanity, AIA California, and I ultimately landed in a marketing role as a full-time job. And that gave me the chance to stay in the profession at the point where I was still convinced I was going to become an architect. And also, it fit me naturally. Like, it was like a logical placement of my skills because I really excel at communication and people, and I'm so interested in business. So that's really when I know it's a kind of a long story, but it's like multiple things that got me there. It wasn't just, it was not like I was interested in stepping into marketing. I kind of had to survive the circumstances of our industry.
Yeah, because even if, as much as the recession hurts us and other economic factors, sometimes those pushes lead us down a better path. Even with COVID, I had a good friend of mine get laid off, but I knew he was already miserable ahead of that, and he needed that push and that layoff to pivot his career because he didn't go back into a standard role. He's like, okay, this is my opportunity to make a pivot. I wasn't happy. And even if you were happy and get laid off, sometimes it's okay, what else can I discover to stay adjacent or kind of nearby in that role?
Yeah, I can understand that. And I would just say that sometimes when you're coming out of school, it's really not clear like what you're supposed to be stepping to. And I think school kind of sets it up that there's really one path in our field or one primary path. And the reality is, and I hope architectural education will continue to expand in their communication, that there's a lot of paths that have historically not been represented. And I think there's a wide range of opportunities out there.
Yeah. And I wanted to touch on, it kind of pivots onto a statement you made, and it was when you thought you still wanted to be a licensed architect. And it can be really hard for people to make that decision to, education told us this is your path. This is the direction, the only direction you can go. So sometimes when you decide, okay, that's not for me, it can be very overwhelming, to say the least, or trying to figure out, okay, am I making the right pivot? I've been told for years and years, this is the only way to do it. So what was that experience like for you that it was, I don't have to do this path anymore?
It's a great question. It took me a long time to get to this point where I can say this openly and honestly, but it was a struggle. It was full of shame. Because I stepped into that marketing role and I still in my head was thinking, oh, I'm going to be an architect. Like in my head, I was like, I'm going to be a principal and owner of a firm one day. Any of these firms will be lucky to have me because one day I'm going to run their firm. Crazy, but that's where my brain was at whatever that point in my career was. And then it took me a long time to kind of come to terms with it. What I was more interested in was running the business than doing architecture. And so I did marketing for a while, and when I had the opportunity, I actually stepped back into a designer role. And I tried to go back, and I did finish my interning hours, and I got the experience because I just didn't have closure on it. I was like in total denial about it. I was like, I'm going to do this. And so a mentor actually welcomed me into his firm, and I got the experience. I got to do Revit and waterproofing details and work on really complex, massive projects. I worked on one that was a huge tower in downtown San Francisco. And then I also worked on a project that was for a university in California. So anyway, I got the full experience. And then at that point, I was like, oh, my career is delayed by 5 years. I'm not going to catch up. And this is really not what I want to do. And I started to come to terms with the fact that what I really wanted to do was something else. I just didn't know what it was.
Because then it's like a wide open ocean. And it's when you're not set on that path, it's like, well, now what do I do?
Yeah.
But then it's like when you see the ocean, it's like, oh, all these problem solving skills and everything else that architecture's taught us can really go in so many different directions.
Mm-hmm.
So since I'm assuming at that point is when you'd wanted to go back for your MBA. So was that the drive when you hit that realization of you liked the business side, or how did deciding to go the education side?
I think actually the decision to go for my MBA was directly in response to how painful navigating the recession was. I think I sent out like, oh my gosh, just so many emails trying to send my resume out and figure out. And I was like writing crazy job proposals where I was like, sure, I'll be your sustainability coordinator. And I was like, I don't even know what that is, but I'm going to submit an application. I was just trying anything because I wanted to stay in the field. So that was a process I went through. Just and firms weren't responding to people. That was the other part that I found really difficult emotionally, was that they couldn't even return a courtesy. Like, you're at that point, and I know everybody was just trying to survive, but they weren't really communicating that they weren't hiring. And if there was an opening, it was like, you had 50 applicants that you were trying to narrow down to whoever was going to be the best fit. Highly competitive. So detouring all of that to say, it was a very painful experience trying to go from job to job to job. I was on unemployment at one point, and I never wanted to be that vulnerable again. And I wanted to take a step towards something of where my niche in the field was. And I couldn't, most people think about being involved in the business of architecture as something you earn through time and tenure. And I wanted to prove that I had that skill set and I could do it. So I think I knew in school, actually. And then when that experience happened, I was like, I'm going to do this. And I went and toured all of the schools in the Bay Area and picked a school that fit me. And the last thing I'll say is just that it was very much related to the fact that I grew up watching my parents support a small engineering business. And I think innately, and I didn't know this at the time, but I have entrepreneurial skills that I'm unwilling to change about myself. So like, that's just who I am. I'm entrepreneurial at heart. And so that's kind of all of those things coming together again, intersecting and creating this result.
Yeah. And I can relate because my dad had his own art gallery. So, and my mom did all the accounting for it. So I knew what it was to be an owner of a business. You have to push to, work some weekends and get some other things done because he physically was putting things together for people. So I grew up seeing a small business and not like, hey, my parents were all doctors and lawyers and corporate pay and all those benefits. There were good years, there were bad years, but it has really put a lens on how I even design architecture.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, the things you grow up with, and you don't realize how much it affects you until you're an adult and you're dealing with those different situations, that it's kind of a full circle.
Yeah. The reason I say I'm unwilling to give it up is because it took me a long time to realize that other people don't have that same filter on the world. So I was always approaching things like, well, we're just going to jump in and we're going to do it. And then I would see other people and they were like hanging back going, why? And I guess I realized like, yeah, it's so ingrained in who I am. And it also, I think another point that I want to make is that it made me really confused all the way through architecture school why business wasn't being taught, because it seems like such an important thing that people would need to know running a firm eventually or even supporting one.
Yeah, because even like I was a business minor and I could have stayed on to have like one more year and have my MBA, which I kind of regret that I didn't do that. But taking financial accounting again was like, I do not want to take financial accounting again. That was awful. But even just like a business of architecture side, because you really don't even hit professional practice courses until your master's. And it tends to be the reject course. And you may get 1 credit hour, 3 credit hours, however your school denotes their hours. But compared to studio and the amount of time and effort, like there's so many small businesses in architecture, you really need to have a foundation on how the business works, but also as an employee, knowing how fees work and your time and dedication towards different amounts of studying or design iterations. If you don't understand the financials and the budget to it, you could blow through fee in a heartbeat without even realizing it. Yeah. And there's just that lack of education, just baby steps on like a mini architecture business boot camp in college, and how much like that would just propel us forward as an industry.
Yeah, don't get me started. I could go on a whole soapbox about it. We're so disproportionate on what we emphasize in our education, and I'll leave it at that.
That could be a whole nother podcast.
It's a huge topic.
But let's dive into you taking the big leap and deciding to open up Apostrophe Consulting. So I know you spoke a little bit about the services, and we kind of touched on it with the last question, but how did it start? I know for an MBA, they tend to want you to make a like actual business as part of it. So wasn't sure if that was part of your MBA and creating and figuring this out. But getting it started and launched, how did that go?
Well, I think from the time I was really young, I knew I wanted to run a business. So that was always a non-negotiable in my brain. I was going to do that. I just didn't know what business I was going to run. So when I went through the MBA experience, it kind of was a incubation period for me. It was like the thesis that I never got in architecture school, of like bringing together these things that I was super interested in and then turning it into something. Mm-hmm. So all of my experiences working in the Bay Area in practice, all of my interest areas, and then that 4 years where I was like going back and forth between working full-time in San Francisco for these architecture firms and going to night classes in Oakland, and trying to bring those two worlds together to figure out, how do I bridge these two things into something that's really compelling? Because I'll be frank, I think that some of the ideas in our industry are pretty stale. And I was interested, especially being in San Francisco, I was like so inspired by the future-focused emphasis that most of the businesses out there are leading through, like technology, culture, innovation. I was looking at companies like IDEO and going, oh my gosh, why are we not doing this? So I was trying to figure that gap out and figure out what my business could be. The first step I took, you asked if I had like a capstone. Mm-hmm. I did. And instead of doing it for myself, I did it for the AIA. I gifted them because I was an overachieving volunteer for a very long time. I wrote their business plan for the Leadership Institute that we launched and ran for 5 years, and it basically reached 3,000 architects and designers. And I didn't do that alone, I should say. There was an entire team around me that we worked across the country to produce that event, and it was very successful, but it scratched at this idea that I had around leadership in architecture. Mm-hmm. And later, I did get a concentration in social entrepreneurship. And I was starting to kind of define the parameters of my business. It actually took me leaving the Bay Area, going all in on launching this business from a financial standpoint and a time standpoint, to actually start figuring out what it was. So when I moved to Raleigh in 2019, that was really the beginning. And I basically have been iterating on it for the last 5 years to refine it and figure out what is it that I'm trying to do. And it essentially boils down to working on the business side of practice to support leadership development, driving change in firms, and creating strong studio cultures within those firms. So I'm really passionate about changing the industry, and my business is a venue for accomplishing that.
Yeah. And I even forget, I was going to back up.
I'm probably giving you too much. Sorry.
No, you're good. But building a business itself, it's not you get it done right the first time. It has to evolve. Like even an architecture firm, if you think you're going to do one thing, I think it was Gloria Clotter that I talked to, and now she does a lot of churches. And she's like, I wasn't planning on doing churches, but a project ended up in my lap and you do well at it and you get more work. It's the same thing when she created her own firm. She wasn't expecting to go down that route, but you have to kind of let yourself explore your business.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's actually, that was one of the lessons I learned. You know, when you build a business, there's a lot of hard lessons learned. One of them was that when I started, I wasn't confident enough to go after what I really wanted. And so I started doing marketing in the early years just because cash flow, it was a natural pivot. People knew me for marketing. So I did marketing for a while, and then people were like really confused when they would bring me marketing projects and it wasn't what I wanted to do. I even had people ask me if I wanted to do PR, and I was like, yeah, I'm really good at those things. But the thing that's motivating me is changing this industry. Mm-hmm. And I can't change the industry just promoting work for projects and people. I actually have to get in there and help them figure out how to lead change.
Yeah. I know when I started doing I had an ARE series where I just shared stories and people thought I taught how to get through the exams. And I was like, oh, that wasn't what I was doing. I was trying to storytell. And I'm like, okay, as much as I love telling these stories, I got to not do that anymore.
Yeah.
And pivot my storytelling, which is then how I ended up podcasting. So let's talk about the bigger picture and pivot. But it's like, okay, when you start doing one thing, then you're like, oh, sorry, that's not what I wanted to do. Let me pivot. I'm sorry.
I know. I had to go through a lot of, again, I don't know if this is just something in myself, I guess. It takes a long time for these things to click. But I had a mentor last year who really helped me figure out okay, don't keep doing marketing if it's not what you want to do. You got to let that go. Because if you're good at it, we're just going to pull you into it deep. And I was like, fair point. Okay.
It's even good advice for architects. If they don't want to be doing a certain thing, you got to stop. But you had gone for your MBA prior to starting your business. If you didn't have your MBA and you already have a business, would you recommend people going back for their MBA if they have their own business now? Post, would you go back?
That's a really great question. I think with degrees that the investment of a degree, and especially a master's level degree, is really warranted if there's something that you're trying to get out of it. So if you were to go through an executive MBA and you're running a business and you know that you're trying to use that to build your business, sure. But if you are not super invested in business as a discipline, and I say discipline in the same sense that architecture is a discipline, you show up and you practice that, I don't know that it's a great investment because you really need to be committed to the work. There's so much homework. Mm-hmm. So I think you can run a business without an MBA, but I think an MBA is like a super accelerator for people who really care about those topics.
Yeah, and trying to take that step or leap forward.
Exactly.
So, but you also started your business in 2019.
Yeah.
So how did COVID kind of shake everything up for you?
Oh, that was a problem. Another problem. I've had a lot of really weird detours thanks to like economic circumstances and world disasters. So my timing wasn't great. 6 months before the pandemic is a hard time to start a business. I moved to North Carolina for financial stability to accelerate like catching up in my career and where I wanted to be. And be closer to family. And then basically the world stopped as I was trying to launch my company. And I was in this city where I didn't really know anybody. I knew a handful of people, but most of the architects here didn't know me. So the two benefits that came out of COVID for me were it unlocked my opportunity as a young business owner to drive the technology side of my company and be a virtual practice, because it wasn't a weird thing at that time for companies. So my business grew because of West Coast firms and firms that were not in North Carolina. They were the ones that were really willing to invest in me early on because I had such a reputation out in the Bay Area. So that helped me get off the ground. And I also developed that relationship with Evelyn through the podcast, which became a really important part of my professional growth during the pandemic and slightly after.
Yeah, because I think before the pandemic, I really only knew of like one firm that was doing more remote things, there were probably plenty, but as a young professional just looking around, there weren't any in Pittsburgh for me that's like, hey, this is a remote firm in Pittsburgh, to like know the person and the name. But COVID really just showed you can do so much. And you don't have to travel all the time. You don't have to be somewhere and still have an impact to help others. So, and I know you just celebrated 5 years. So how has the business evolved to this point, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, it was a really big milestone for me to survive 5 years on my own. That means for 5 years, I haven't had a paycheck. I've had to go, like, when I celebrate 5 years on LinkedIn, for me, it's like reflective of, I went out and figured out how to financially support myself for 5 years. I did that on my own. I was able to pay for my own healthcare for 5 years. I was able to go and find clients for 5 years that trusted me to help me build my business and help them build their businesses. And the amount of growth personally in that period of time was tremendous. Like, I grew so much because of the need of what it took to run a business and a podcast, and how it pushed me to really stretch beyond all of my comfort level.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for anybody that may be starting their own business venture, whether it's AEC specific or adjacent? Like, if somebody approached you saying, hey, I took your course or your workshops, I loved it, and I want to go off on my own, what advice would you have for somebody just starting out?
Well, I think people underestimate the emotional component of running a business. I think fear and anxiety and stress are the number one reasons why anyone kind of stops a business, because it's brutal. Like, it's you and yourself, and you got to confront all of your own challenges. You can't blame anyone when you run your own business. You have to be accountable for the things. If you didn't come up with enough money, it's probably your fault. Like, you didn't go out there and get enough leads that would generate enough revenue, and turn it over and like follow through on it, and, all of it. And so I think that the tip I would say is just don't be afraid, but expect the fear. Like, be ready that the fear is going to be the thing that you dance with every single week. Like, you're going to have to confront your anxiety on a daily, weekly basis. And your ability to meet that and keep going forward, even when it's scary, is going to be the thing that determines if you can make it as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And even you mentioned that you have your own mentor that you talk to on the business side, and how you have restructured in what you're doing. So sometimes you need to have a lot of people around.
Yeah, I have a lot of mentors. I don't just have one, I have many. I've built a community around me of people that I can turn to, that I really trust and have good relationships with. And it's so important. And I think everybody needs that, because it's really hard, navigating professional growth on your own.
Yeah, it definitely takes a village to figure it out, but then sometimes see the blind spots that you can't see yourself.
I know. And sometimes also The other thing is sometimes when they do give you feedback, it takes a while. Mentorship is not always instantaneous. Sometimes it takes time for that thing that they said to really get in your brain and resonate. And that's definitely happened to me. Like sometimes you just need time to process it or really sit with something that you don't really see and then finally recognize it. But I want to come back to your question because you also asked me about where I see Apostrophe heading in the future. So I talked to you about that iterative process that I've been going through of like refining what this is that I'm doing. And I would say like in the last year 5 was when I figured it out. I was staying too broad. I was trying to do everything. And so people weren't understanding what it is that I'm trying to do. Like what's motivating me? What's the thing I can do for them? And in the last year, I've kind of gotten really narrow with that. So I've built a practice where I've worked with 30 firms and worked with over 300 leaders. But where I want to go is fewer clients, deeper engagements, and like really transformative work. I want to be working with the firms that are the leaders of our industry that are going to lead our entire profession forward because they actually hear the things about what we need to change and do something about it. They change the things in their business model. They change the way they engage their people. They think about offering clients something that's unique, that's different than their competitors. And then together, we just completely set a new bar for this industry.
Yeah, because I feel too often, not to diss architects, because I am one, but we are too afraid to act on something with change. Like we will listen, we'll go to workshops, we'll go to lunch and learns, but then when it comes to actionable change to move something forward, they're often just so slow. And it's, hey, we'll do that in 8 months or we'll do that next year. I'm like, why?
Right.
Why can't we just iterate the business like we would iterate a project? And if you fail, it's fine. Just fail fast and learn from it and pivot.
Yep.
Rather than trying to make it perfect. So then 3 years from now, it'll all be figured out. But then by that time, so much has changed that there's new factors.
Well, it took me, I felt that same way. And what I can say from 6 years of working with firm owners is it's because deep down, it's really not the driver. The driver is design and architecture and building. And so until the priorities can shift or until you have a pain point that's so severe or until you have somebody in the firm that sees this possibility, it's not a priority. Because they don't want to do it.
Yeah. Do you feel the younger generations coming in and those, starting and growing their career, I feel like they have more of that shift mentality to those priorities where
absolutely
I've seen more of the senior staff, I did it this way. This is how I learned. This is how I struggled. You got to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we're at a weird point where it's not even just a single generation. It's kind of like two ends clashing together. And where that's going to take us, like I feel like some firms are just going to propel forward if they can hone in on those leadership, professional development, business side of architecture, and just overall humanism and balance. Not even balance, but just like that whole other side of living and experiencing the world around us beyond just the design side and traditional architecture. So I don't know if you've seen any of those clashes firsthand in some of your workshops.
Yeah, it's very generational. I think you're spot on. And I always, it took me a while. I think this was what was frustrating about me trying to figure out how to articulate and sell my business was the change that I believe in is not something that everyone can see. So sometimes like you, I don't have to say much and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, you know what I'm talking about. You share that deep down thing that I'm trying to communicate, the desire to change it and make it different. then you go, and I would talk to other people, and it was just like, they just couldn't hear it. And it was like, this is like one of those weird, magic photos where, like, if you look at it one way, you can't see it. And if you look at it another way, you can see it. It's really about your experiences in the profession, whether you can see it or not. If you see a possibility for change, if you recognize that some of the things that people voice in the firm could change, there's always going to be constraints about why it cannot change. But the belief that there is room for some change is all you need to get any change going.
Yeah, because I don't feel a lot of it is like, as much as we talk about it as like we need major change in the industry, it's not really. It's like tiny little baby steps.
Yeah. It's
to like little like thought processes that if you do that, it'll just sprinkle through the culture of an office. Like, so many firm leaders want everybody back in the office. But if you did some of these other tweaks that weren't related to mandates being in the office, people would naturally want to be in the office.
Right.
And so it's like, no, if you do these things, it'll be a very different approach, but you will get that same end result.
You get a better result.
Yeah, because you want to be there. A mandate's like, okay, if you enjoy XYZ, this is fantastic. But if you're not making the culture inviting, making it safe for professionals to come in, ask questions, having it be an engaging environment, then they're going to question, why are you back in the office anyway? So there's other things.
Think it's undoing a mindset that's so ingrained in our industry it's hard to unteach. And it's also hard to convince people that there's a guaranteed benefit on the other side of making that change. And that's, you kind of have to do it small steps, but demonstrate the return is really great.
Yeah. And just see if it works. Like I said,
yeah, you can always change it.
Yeah, and it's fine. But is there anything fun and exciting coming up for 2025?
Oh, so much. I think with clarity in my business messaging, I'm trying to really hit the ground running this year with accelerating what I'm trying to sell and the firms that I'm trying to work with. I'm already like off the ground in January running with some really great companies that want to do this work. And I have a wonderful opportunity in February with AI Triangle Women in Architecture, where I'm going to be doing a keynote about some of the things that I'm seeing. And I'm very excited about that.
Yeah. So stay tuned for that. And hey, now that you're doing keynotes, keep it open as an option. If anybody's putting together conferences for summer, fall, call you up. So I know people want to hear these conversations, and it's just how to get the ball rolling sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really appreciate you inviting me on the show, Caitlin. I think it's great that you're trying to have conversations on mentorship. This is like, I just want to emphasize how important this is, because in my work doing mentorship, coaching and conversations with different firms, there's literally a percentage of our industry that doesn't know how to mentor. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that you've built an entire podcast around this topic is so valuable, because I think it's going to hopefully be a great resource that people can lean on for ideas about how they might approach it in their firms.
Yeah. And not everybody's meant to be a mentor. Not everybody's meant to be a teacher. So it's okay. But then sometimes if you're looking for something, don't expect every individual you reach out to be like this all-star mentor type scenario. You got to find the people that really resonate with you.
Yeah, that's right. Totally agree.
But I did want to touch also back on the Practice Disrupted podcast. I know you've stepped away to focus on your business, but how has co-hosting with Evelyn on the Practice Disrupted podcast really help you in your own growth in starting your own consulting business and professional development and network?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Honestly, it was really transformative. It not only helped me understand that I'm not alone, like you talked about building community, totally helped me. It helped me speak to, I think we talked to nearly 200 people in the 140 episodes that I did. And that helped me see that this change, this thing that I was trying to figure out, it wasn't just me that was seeing the profession this way. There were so many other ideas. And I think through the practice of showing up and recording on a regular basis, it helped me articulate my ideas, tell my story, refine my voice. And that really accelerated my confidence. And so while stepping away from the podcast was really difficult, so it was like a child that I had to give away. I just want to say that I'm so incredibly proud of what Evelyn and I built, because I think we started a conversation in the industry that allowed people who shared our ideas to step forward in new and exciting ways. And I think that it also helped me figure out how to build my own business, because it gave me some of the puzzle pieces that I was trying to pull together to create Apostrophe Consulting. So I'm really glad Evelyn's still leading that. And I know that that continues to be a resource for people, and that she's continuing to develop episodes to create more content that kind of builds upon and iterates on what we've done.
Yeah. And it's not easy to step away and hone in, as much as you honed in on your business. It's, you do things for a period of time, and having conversations with 200 people is phenomenal, because you never know what perspectives you're going to hear. I learn from every guest I've had on the podcast. Yep. Mm-hmm. And so when you have these conversations, it's just invigorating. I can't do these podcasts right before I go to bed, or I won't go to sleep, because I get so energized by having these conversations that it's a lot of fun. So I can see why it was so hard to step away from it, and why you guys have done so many episodes so far. And I'm glad Evelyn's continuing, because she's definitely going to have a hard year balancing that with AIA president.
I know. So, yeah. She's got a full plate.
But I always like wrapping up my podcast with this final question, and it's, what advice do you have for young professionals just starting their career?
Well, I think that the opportunities and careers in our field are so much broader than they were when I was graduating school. And so I think, stay open and curious. There's a lot that you can do with an architectural degree. And I think that it's about finding, you kind of said it, finding people that resonate with what you're interested in. You have to kind of go out and have conversations to figure that out. So find people that can help you figure out what that is for you. And don't be afraid to chart your own course. Your career does not have to look like anybody else's in this field. And I think there's beauty in trying to figure out and develop that journey for yourself. The challenges can be guides that point you in a new direction, and opportunities that you can create something that's really, truly uniquely yours.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice, because you never know where you're going to go in your career. You don't know what you're going to stumble upon. You don't know what roadblocks you're going to hit, or when you discover something too,
or who you're going to meet.
Yeah. I know that was you for me in starting mentorDINO. So as much as I said in the beginning, when I discovered you and Evelyn doing the podcast and looking up what both of you guys did, it was seeing your business. As much as you said you were very chaotic in starting it out, that was my initial light. And it took me many years of imposter syndrome to get over that I could do something to make an impact. And so it took me many years to get to mentorDINO and where I am now, but seeing how you can educate and change the industry itself so far. And I'm so excited to see where you go in the future.
Thank you, Caitlin. I wish we were in person, because I give you a huge hug, but you don't know how much that means to me. That is absolutely why we did the podcast, is to help create, resources for people that need it. And look what you've created. It's incredible.
Yeah.
So cool.
I never would have thought I would be podcasting as when you look at when you graduate school, what you're going to do. I never thought I'd be podcasting or trying to teach the industry as a whole. It was always just, okay, I'm going to be an architect and I'm going to go down this path. So
has it enriched your, I know it has. How has it enriched your journey?
I know it's definitely just energized me. I know I read the book called A Portfolio Life. So as much as we diversify our 401ks and finances, when you can diversify your career, there are things that can energize you to give you life to other components or other careers you're doing. So these conversations bring energy to me to show up to work the next day and help train and mentor people on my projects and guide owners. So it's, as much as these are two entities that I'm working with, they definitely feed off of each other. And I could have an awful day at work during the day, have a fantastic podcast interview, or struggle on a podcast interview with internet and all the things that can happen podcasting, and have a fantastic day at work, and they all kind of balance out. So
I love that.
It's fun.
That's good. Yeah. Well, this is cool. Well, I'm excited to having our entrepreneurs lunch whenever we see each other next.
Definitely. And if anybody wants to get a hold of you to help their firm out, set up any workshops or keynotes, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
If you go to apostrophe.consulting, I have a contact page. You can also just directly email hello@apostrophe.consulting, and it'll find its way to me. And then we'll see what the scope of your project is, hopefully have a conversation, and go from there.
Great. And I will leave all those links down below, so it's real easy for any of you guys to find Janine so she can help your firm or your own personal career growth. So thank you so much, Janine, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Oh, thank you so much, Caitlin.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Learn some advice to take with you and see how our industry is all tied together to create the world around us. Check out the description below for any links or resources we discussed. If you liked the episode, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support finding that career path that best works for them. If you know someone that has inspired your own career that you'd like me to interview, let me know in the comments below, or you can reach out to me via my website or LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share their story or your own. Thank you again, and I cannot wait for the next career story I get to share with you next week.